Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Support for this podcast comes from your generous gifts and donations. You can find out more about Ravi Zacharias and the team at www.rzim.org.
RZIM is privileged to have 40-some speakers placed in about a dozen-plus countries globally. One of the great thrills I have is working alongside these wonderful voices. I think a unique one and a highly blessed one, an influential one in our team is Jill Caratini. I still remember the day she walked into our office for the first time several years ago, and what a bright light she has been. She has inspired my own life, and watching her grow and blossom into a powerful writer has truly been a thrill. Her recent studies at Duke have only enriched her. Her desire to bridge the gospel with artistic expression is a powerfully relevant approach in our time.
One of the reasons why I so love the arts and find it of value to the ministry of apologetics and evangelism around the world is that it really does help us embody the story a bit more, to involve our senses in what we're saying about truth. So it's very easy to make truth statements and have them kept almost abstract or only in our minds. But the arts really do help us bring them back down, to live with them and try them out. And that is exactly what Jesus wants us to do.
This ministry is growing so drastically and so dramatically, but so pointedly, and we need you to stand with us and be enablers for us. Please ask the Lord what he would have you to do to stand with RZIM at this time. We'll be grateful, and on behalf of our entire worldwide team, this is Ravi Zacharias saying thank you so much. I remember hearing him say this on television. Most of those who are objecting to my position are basically religious and Christian people, and I will dismiss their complaints because, as we all know, Christians and religious people are biased on these issues.
A culture under the influence of secularization does more than reject religion. It leads us down a path that eliminates the very foundations upon which humanity is built. Where are we as a culture, and where are we headed? Hello and welcome to Let My People Think with author and apologist Ravi Zacharias. The German atheistic thinker Friedrich Nietzsche declared that God was dead, and before the turn of the 20th century, he predicted what his proclamation meant for mankind. As humanity continues to distance itself from God, we've lost some key truths about life along the way. Today on the program, we're going to hear part one of a message that Ravi titled, Secularization, Its Control and Power. Here's Ravi.
What I want to do, ladies and gentlemen, this morning is set for you a cultural backdrop of what we really see, particularly in the North American mindset. And the lecture will take you more through a sociological analysis looking at the last 2 decades and how we arrived at this particular time in the way we think and the bases on which our decisions are made. I have often summed it up in question form. How do you reach a generation that listens with its eyes and thinks with its feelings? That is very descriptive of how we absorb information today and what kind of visceral response we have through that eye gate with which we define reality. Somewhere, of course, in the middle of this century, the world began to change. Our entire way of evaluating what we were up against came up against a couple of wars, and the war that was supposed to end all wars did not end all wars. And we found out at the end of this century that the German atheistic philosopher Nietzsche was more correct than many other utopianists. For Nietzsche, when he died in 1900, before that, having spent the last 13 to 14 years moving between sanity and insanity, he said because of the, quote, death of God in the 19th century, the 20th century would become the bloodiest century in history, and a sort of universal madness would break out. The same year also died the noted writer Oscar Wilde, who had sort of gone into that marvelous orb of pleasure. And as he lay on his bed dying in Paris with one of his closest friends, he voiced to that friend of his, and I think some of the most impassioned words ever written. He said, everything in the garden of life that portended pain and suffering, I resisted. Everything that intimated pleasure and delight, I went towards. And what I have ended up doing is meeting the pain and the suffering, except I have come to it the wrong way around. That life of hedonism let him down. And the ideas of secularism still continue to hold sway. But in the middle of all of this, the categories are being eroded. The first description, I think, of our way of thinking today is aptly described as the process of secularization. Now, I didn't say mere secularism. I'm talking about secularization. And secularization is the process by which religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. Secularization, the process by which religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. There's kind of an inversion that has taken place in society. Once upon a time, in our answers, if the worldview was considered to be systemically religious, it was accepted that from that there would be some entailments. Now, if it is assumed for a moment that there is a religious worldview at the heart of your answer, the entailments are dismissed, or a long conversation emerges in which you've got to start justifying your very first principles here. Let me illustrate this for you. In the 1980s, as I was living in Toronto, there was a major social, morally divisive issue being debated in the city. And one of the mayoralty candidates debunked the notion of absolutes and any moral principles that had to be brought to bear here. And when he received thousands of telephone calls, I remember hearing him say this on television, most of those who are objecting to my position are basically religious and Christian people, and I will dismiss their complaints because, as we all know, Christians and religious people are biased on these issues. Unblushing, openly, and you could begin to see the shifting mindset of the populace that could accept such statements and say, yeah, that is correct, who's going to challenge this? They are biased, we are very objective. Some years ago in the city of Atlanta, Georgia, there was a major trial for a pornographer whose stuff was described as so bad that it made ordinary pornography look pretty decent. But it took them many, many days to even select the members of a jury, because one of the questions the defense team was asking potential jurors was this question, are you a member of a local church? And in the South, of course, a lot of people are members of local churches. And if the answer was in the affirmative, yes, I'm a member of the local church, they were almost automatically dismissed because they were assumed to have a bias against pornography. But what is interesting is how the defense lawyer proceeded in his questioning of the witnesses who were describing the horrific stuff that this particular man had put on the pages of his products and so on. The way he asked the question was so brilliant that any thinking person would have to step back and say, this is not going to be an easy question to respond to, particularly in the context of sitting in a witness stand and giving brief soundbite answers to the questioning attorney. So he looked at one of the potential jurors and he said, sir, have you ever been into an art gallery? Yes. Have you ever paid to go into that art gallery? Yes. Have you ever paid to go into an art gallery where there are paintings by the grand masters of art? Yes. Have you ever paid to go into a gallery where the paintings by the grand masters where there are paintings of disrobed or unclothed people present in that art gallery? Yes. Would you please explain to this jury why you paid to do that, go into it, and call that art, and call my client's products pornography? How do you answer that? How do you answer that without first even establishing a worldview and the basis of reference for what is aversion and what is a perversion? I recall as I sat back thinking to myself, this was an impossible situation within that context. But then I asked myself the question, Ravi, what would you do If you were sitting across this lawyer who actually believed that line of questioning to be legitimate, how would you answer him? And that's where the real challenge comes. Because, if you find one or two things in common between two things, how do you establish the fundamental differences between them without going through the whole process of evaluating what is truth and what is false? But I recall a couple of illustrations that did come into my mind. A couple of them were these. When Michelangelo first started to paint unclothed people in his artwork, his teacher called him aside and he said to him, "Why are you doing this?" And Michelangelo said to him, "Because I want to see man as God sees man." And the teacher just snapped back and said, "But you're not God, are you?" There is a pointed question even in that small dialogue that needs to be pursued a little further. But let's go on even deeper into this issue, because I think here's where the categories seem to become so blurred. And the illustration I borrow is from C.S. Lewis's writings, A Pilgrim's Regress. But the kind of book A Pilgrim's Regress is, it is an allegorical style book of Lewis's conversion. In Surprised by Joy, it's a straightforward story of how he had come to Christ thinking he'd come to a place. He found out he'd come to a person. But in this particular one, A Pilgrim's Regress, he is going through the philosophical challenges he faced as a young man. At some points struggling between naturalism and theism. At other points between pantheism and theism, one of the greatest struggles of his life. But in the naturalistic framework in this allegorical story, and by the way, he calls it A Pilgrim's Regress rather than progress, in distinction to Bunyan's book, it's because he says when he faced all these options along the way, he rejected many of them, even when he did not have a satisfactory, rational answer for why he was turning away from some of these options. It is only when he came to find that personal relationship with Christ that he took a regressive journey, and he had the more complete answers to explain the reasons for those other rejections. At one point, he is here trapped in a mountain called the Spirit of the Age. His description is fascinating. He describes he who guards this framework of naturalism as grim, austere, looking down upon his subjects with a kind of a neuronic stare, controlling them. The hands are cuffed of those who live within this mountain called the Spirit of the Age. Quite a description, isn't it? We think when you live by boundless pleasure, you are absolutely free. Lewis reverses that and says you are actually enchained during that process. And he says, here I was with my hands bound in this mountain called the Spirit of the Age, hands within loosened to serve me my meal. And as the breakfast came to me, I made the mistake of commenting to the waiter, representing the Spirit of the Age, how tasty the milk was. And the waiter looked at me and said, you just call it milk. All it is the secretion of a cow. What is the difference between its urine and its milk? They're both secretions, aren't they? And young John, given to the name of this young man, Lewis representing himself, said he cringed, but he did not know how to respond. A few minutes later, he said, I made an even bigger mistake and commented on the deliciousness of the eggs. He says, then you should have seen the description the waiter gave of what the eggs actually were. He said, and I remained silent until some moments went by. And reason came riding on a horse and lifted me and rescued me. And as reason was rescuing me, turned around and looked at the Spirit of the Age and said, sir, you lie. You lie because you do not know the difference between what nature has meant for nourishment and what nature has meant for refuse or garbage. The problem with naturalism is it does not know where to draw the lines of distinction between that which is there for our nourishment and that which is there for refuse and garbage. No matter how much they have tried, take the best-known writers representing them, Guy Nielsen from Canada, Richard Dawkins from Oxford, even Bertrand Russell, the inability to rationally arrive at an objective moral ethic, so much so at a point Richard Dawkins actually says this, and I quote, he says, the reason reason we have religious and moral thoughts within our thinking is because something has gone wrong with the software of humanity. It's a virus that has entered our thinking. We need to somehow expunge this virus. And he even dismisses a category called evil. Clearly, he says he doesn't know how we can even arrive at such a category. But you see, when you look at these issues being drawn in as parallels, as pornography and as art, at least there are some fundamental lines of difference, aren't there, regardless of the external similarities? If, for example, an artist takes a canvas and paint and is painting the disrobed body with his mind, thinking of whatever ill thoughts he may or she may or may not have, suppose that is the end result and the process is carried on very judiciously. There is no way for the canvas or the paint or the oil to shout out and scream out at the artist and say, please do not do this to me. There is no way to respond. But if a young woman is being taken in front of the lens of a camera, the purpose of those doing that to her is to exploit her very physical features, to be used in titillating the fanciful imagination of somebody buying that, to provoke that person to an insatiable road that moves him along more and more and more till it completely skews and damages the imagination. Ought not that person to reconsider for a moment and say to the person using her, please don't do this to me? But the end result of a sheer naturalistic framework spelled with a capital N is that she will not respond that way because she will have ultimately at their hands had the erosion of a sense of shame. When shame has been jettisoned from our society, you will find how incredible the mind becomes. You remember what Ted Bundy said some months before? He looked at the people who asked him if he had not felt any guilt with the path that he had taken. Here's exactly what he says. I do not feel any guilt. In fact, I feel sorry for anyone who does feel any sense of guilt. And at the judgment, the judge looked at him and said, Mr. Bundy, I am so sorry that a man as brilliant as you, sir, wreaked such havoc in your life. He'd lost his points of reference. He'd lost that sense of how to arrive at what was a shameful act and what is not a shameful act. When secularism has done its doing, may I suggest to you, think through it very carefully, that we may actually end up producing a generation of men and women who've lost their sense of shame. And you show me a man or woman without a sense of shame, I will show you a potentially deadly weapon you're looking at. It was Adolf Hitler who said whose writing is on the walls of Auschwitz, who said, I want to raise a generation of young people devoid of a conscience, imperious, relentless, and cruel. And he nearly succeeded. Secularization ends up with no sense of shame. Where religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance, how do you arrive at a transcendent moral basis or any objective moral law? The next mood we have is that of pluralization, where we have a competing number of worldviews available to our members and no one worldview is dominant. A competing number of worldviews available to our members and no one worldview is dominant. Now, just to be sure, let me qualify it first by saying I think pluralization is a wonderful and a fascinating thing. It has its many, many strengths. One of the things pluralism does, by the way, is that it compels every individual to take serious note of what he or she actually believes of internal value and why he or she believes it. I was raised in a pluralistic culture, although it was predominantly Hindu. 80% of India is Hindu, 10% Muslim. Then you've got the Sikhs, the Buddhists, the Jains, the Christians, and numerous other small groups of believers, the Baha'is and so on. And you get the feel of a pluralism. And there is something wonderful about a pluralistic society. Toronto, by the way, has just been dubbed by the United Nations as the #1 most multicultural society in the world. Toronto, Canada. And this pluralistic thing is a fascinating thing. I, for example, love what pluralization has done in the world of cuisine. It's fantastic. I mean, it is absolute folly to ask anybody whether he wants a hamburger or curry and rice. The decision is obvious. What it is that 1 billion people would choose. You just see it, you know, you walk through some parts of North America. I remember walking through the streets of Miami and seeing a sign outside the store, English spoken here. I said, "Phew, thankfully I can get some answer now to my questions," and stepped in. The world of pluralization, Peter Wagner has a quip about this in California, and that's why, by the way, pluralization is often described as the Los Angelesation of the world. But Peter Wagner talks about pluralization on the streets of Los Angeles, where there is a fast food outlet owned by a Korean who is selling kosher tacos. There's culinary pluralism for you. It is wonderful to have that in cuisine. It is wonderful to have it in accents. I honestly say to you with no pretense, people often say to me, it must be so hard to be traveling so much. Yes, it is. And for 30 years I have crisscrossed this globe. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I can get off in Amman or in Beirut or in Cairo or in Delhi or in Bombay or in Barcelona and get on the phone and call a good friend. And it's wonderful to hear these accents. It's even wonderful to hear counter perspectives and be compelled to measure and evaluate your own, sometimes at the point of discomfort. Having said all of that, here then is the big qualifier. If pluralization is extrapolated into meaning moral relativism, that's when the danger signs begin. Peter Berger said it well. Pluralism breeds a philosophical relativism in which the average person stands confused as to whether any single voice among the contending options lays claim to the truth. We appear as a reed shaken in the wind. Think of the simple statement, all truth is relative. What does that mean? If all truth is relative and the statement stands as it is given, does that statement include itself or exclude itself? If it includes itself, that must mean even that statement is relative, which means it isn't always true. If it excludes itself, it's providing for itself a nimbus of positing an absolute while denying they actually exist. And you know what? I'll say this to you as honestly as I can, and I see a mixed audience here. Asians, Middle Easterners, Orientals, even though some of their worldviews will sometimes bring in the idea of pluralism, they know very well when it is being violated and where there are untradeable absolutes in all of them. When I was in front of an NPR radio interview last week, and he looks at me and he says, you know, Christianity is so exclusivistic. I said, have you ever read any of the other major religions? Islam is exclusivistic. Hinduism is exclusivistic. Buddhism is exclusivistic. In fact, Buddhism was birthed by Gautama Buddha, who was born a Hindu, and rejected two of the fundamental tenets of Hinduism. All major religions at their core have some non-negotiable truths which they will not trade away. Well, one of the Baha'is said, well, we include everything. I said, yeah, but you exclude the exclusivists. You do. You see, somewhere there is an epistemological base. And when you start lifting the layers of it, you begin to see that somewhere every one of us has that non-negotiable commitment to the way we arrive at truth. And that's where a lot of the discussion can intelligently take place.
The world of pluralization raises problems, but it's also full of opportunity for those who boldly and intelligently share the good news of Jesus Christ. You've been listening to Ravi Zacharias and his message, Secularization, Its Control and Power. You can order a copy of this message by calling us at 1-800-448-6766. You can also order online at www.rzim.org.
Hello, friends. This is Ravi Zacharias. This year's Summer Institute in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Georgia Tech Global Learning Center will be from June 19 to 24. Oftentimes I'm there every year, but mostly for a day or so. On this occasion, I will be there for 3 nights because the themes we are addressing are truly critical for our times. We'll have other speakers like John Lennox, Abdul Murray, Nabil Qureshi. We will also have a special guest in Tom Key. Tom Key is an award-winning playwright, and he and I will have one evening where we will dialogue from the platform on the need of the story, the power of the story, and the greatest story of all, which combines both sublimity and relevance for our time because it is cradled in truth, the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. June 19 to 24, Atlanta, Georgia, the Summer Institute at the Georgia Tech Global Learning Center, with a variety of speakers that I think you'll be blessed to hear and whose speaking will change your life. Please join us and go online and apply, contact our office. I will look forward to seeing you there. Because of the importance of the theme, I plan to spend several days there myself. May God bless you, and we would welcome you at 2016 Summer Institute, the RZIM effort here in Atlanta.
If you'd like to write, address your envelope to RZIM, Post Office Box 921939, Norcross, Georgia 30010. Let My People Think is a listener-supported radio ministry and a production of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia.